Yeah, it can be a little intimidating, you know. At first, you kind of have to win Ed over, which is understandable. I mean, he's been doing this a long time, and yeah, he cuts to the chase, you know.
Well, you see, I think Ed's one of those guys who has a tough face, and I think people think you're tough, and sometimes they miss the sweet spot, the soft spot that you have. And Ed obviously has a big soft spot for underdogs. Listen, he's one of a kind. There's nobody, again, who reminds me quite like him, right? Who spoke up like he did.
So he conjures up this rowdy kind of tough guy image that it just makes me want to hug him, you know. But he's smart. God damn, he's smart. You know, he's one of these guys that knows the issues, knows the people, knows what's going on, makes it his business to know what's going on, and doesn't just pay lip service.
He was a consummate performer and very clear when he came on stage, and he knew what was happening, and you couldn't dislodge him because he's undislodgeable.
He will be the first to say that he was also very lucky. He considers himself very lucky with his career, just the timing of it all. Being in Chicago and then New York, and then getting the call to come out west, and it really worked out for him.
A skilled actor from his first days, marvelous comedian, extremely serious actor, leader of the labor movement, visionary leader of the labor movement, and as a senior figure among actors and intellectuals within the entertainment world, a real staunch progressive.
It's an extraordinary man, really, when you come to actually look at what he's done and his amazing career in show business. He must have had a lot of opposition and a lot of people who admired his work but wished him to shut up. He never did. He never will. And so he's a figure of some importance in I think, in cultural history of America over the last 50 years. No doubt about it at all.
My father was a junkman. My two brothers were very bright, very strong, and certainly keyed to being businessmen and making money. My two sisters were both graduates in the social sciences, and both worked as social workers. Kansas City was segregated at the time. And I guess I came home with my full-fledged high school bravado, and I happened to make a comment which will damn me forever in this documentary. Boy, there sure are a lot of niggers in this town. And my sister wheeled on me and said, "You scum, loathsome, ugly, who the hell are you to talk that way?" She let me have it big. And I was also very careful from then on to never resort to that epithet again. I'll still have the shame of my employment of that epithet. Kansas City was not beset badly by the Depression. Pendergast ruled it so well that the city profited from all of the corruption, the prostitution, the policy, the prohibition. But there was anti-Semitism. But I still speak of Kansas City as, even with our segregation, being a gentle place to grow up.
I think his parents owned what has been called a secondhand store in Kansas City, where Asner was born, or a junk store, depending on who writes about it. I guess junk store is probably the right thing. So he comes from poor people, and he has not ever forgotten the context where he came from.
I junkyard was across from Armour's packing house. And 2 blocks down was the overpass that led from the stockyards. And all day long I would hear the bawling of the cattle, or the goats, or the sheep as the Judas goat led them into the packing house.
He was extremely close to his mother, and I'm named after his mother, Liza, Lizzie, and my twin brother Matthew was named after Morris. But I know that he adored his mother very much, and he was the baby of 5, so I'm sure he got quite a bit of love, not only from his mother, who was quite older when she had him. He was also kind of raised by his siblings.
I was an FDR idolater from the get-go. I think it's safe to say he saved this country.
For people of Ed's age, the leftward edge of the New Deal, the belief that something better was going to happen beyond the New Deal, not just the GI Bill and upward mobility for the most successful and most talented, but a transformation of society at large. This was a widely held belief. GIs who came out of the war often were far deeper than people think, had strong political beliefs that society was going to be changed in crucial ways. The poor were going to be made more important, the rich were going to be made less important.
I graduated high school in '47, entered the University of Chicago in the fall of '47. I wanted to get away from Kansas City. I knew that the UFC was highly thought of in political science. I had a cousin there. I thought eventually when I get to the point, I'll go into political science. So I never did. I approached it peripherally.
The University of Chicago was a place that had so many politically active and engaged people. They had read the great books. They were very, very smart. And Asner came out of this hotbed of intellectualism, political thought, and hunger, because there wasn't a theater department, for the theater.
I stayed on at the UFC. After Murder in the Cathedral, I did Oedipus Rex. Then we did The Alchemist. And then finally, my father discovered my relationship with the lady in the chorus, said no more money. And I'd not been going to classes anyway.
I said, but I'm going to stay around here and do another play I'm cast in, Crayon and Oedipus. So my sister was talking to me, and he said, tell him that he couldn't make it as a student, he can't make it as an actor. And I said, well, I'll be the judge of that. Yeah. Later on, he made the statement, if you could sing like Eddie Fisher, then I could believe that, you know. Eddie Fisher was the rage at the time. I wanted to say he played around with a shiksa pop, but I didn't do it.
David Green, of course, who was on the Committee of Social Thought at the University, whose translation we did, was there, and he took a big shine to me, and I became kind of his protege. It was very early on, and I wanted to continue my relationship, and I had to find money so that we could free ourselves and go to Europe maybe and find ourselves there. He said, well, if you get to Europe and you want to try to go to the Abbey, I'll write a letter of recommendation for you, and I'll try to encourage their taking you on. So I built my hopes on the Abbey. Went to work in the auto plant. Felt like a slave laborer and saved my money. So I went back to Chicago, drove a cab, sold over the phone TV advertising, was rotten at all of them. And that eventually fell apart, but I still loved her, still loved her, still loved her. When I came back, I did Julius Caesar, played Brutus. Finally came time that they're going to do Antigone.
At the UFC?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was going to do Crayon again. After the first night's performance, George Blair, the head of the theater, came down to the basement where we were all dressing, and he assembled the cast, and he said, you blithered like this, you did that, you did this. Turned to Fritz Weaver and said, you did that and this, and you did it all because of him. I evidently was shouting my way through the performance, according to him. And he said, I don't know if you were doing it to impress David Green, my mentor, who was in the audience, or what, but I sabotaged the play. I was thunderstruck. So I went into the matinee performance like a whipped puppy, and was told by him later that the show was much better, and continued my whipped puppy conduct for the remaining 3 performances. Somebody fucked up like that, they never worked again in the theater, his theater. UT, University Theater.
I was talking to somebody the other day who's trying to put together a book about the history of theater in Chicago, and he said, you know, before Sills and Asner and people like that, there was no Chicago theater scene. It was touring theaters. It was, you know, shows would come to town on tours and then they'd leave, and then they started that company, and that was kind of the genesis of the whole ball of wax, because this scene, this Chicago theater scene, whatever it is, it's what made me.
You know, I wasn't too eager to enter into it. After all, they weren't in the theater. They were in some goddamn room in Idenoise Hall. Maybe seats 200-300, I don't know. I decided to give it a look-see, and I'm approached by Omar Shapley, who was going to direct the play about Napoleon and a young lieutenant and a woman. And it's a cute play. It's a short play. And I play Napoleon in it, and Alex Hasselhoff, who ended up as the banjoist for the Limelighters, played the young lieutenant, and he was a lovely fellow. And then in, I guess, 50, they want to do a curtain raiser to Androcles and the Lion at the Idenoise Theater. Same group. Okay. Tonight at 8:30 was the name of the group. Mike Nichols is going to be Nero in that one. So they decided to have a curtain raiser. They have Mike going to direct it. It's a playlet called Purgatory, William Butler Yeats. This is a frightful play. Grandfather and his grandson. The grandfather kills the grandson. I'm the grandfather, and Jerry Cunliffe is the grandson. Mike directed, and he reported as the first play he directed, but it kept me busy. And then I went home and got drafted. First at Camp Crowder, Missouri, placement camp. Then a week or two after that was sent down to Camp Gordon, Georgia, the Signal Corps. I had read From Here to Eternity, and I wanted to emulate it as much as possible. Okay. Yeah, going to Athens.
Okay.
The whorehouse there.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
As a young army guy.
Went AWOL and.
AWOL?
Well, you had to get there.
Okay.
Lo and behold, she evidently felt very passionate towards me.
Yeah.
And she wrote me a letter and said that she's coming to Augusta, and can I meet her and bring a friend for her sister, who's also a whore. And they look John over, they don't like him. What am I going to do? I give him the bottle and I say, and I shove him in the other room of the suite and say, there's no sense both of us suffering. And I take him in there and I take Viola to bed.
He's drunk.
Yeah, she's drunk and he's drunk, and they gotta have to drive us to the post so we don't miss reveille. We limp past the guards. We get to the barracks, we're changing into fatigues, and the first sergeant walks in. He's a Bataan Death March survivor, and he's a very mild guy though. And he says, Asner, where the hell were you? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, your wife called. I said, yeah. I could, what's she calling for? And it was either to see if I was all right or to get me into trouble. I couldn't figure out which. Anyway, time moves on. We weren't caught. And a few weeks later, I find out that she's marrying a second lieutenant. So that was the affair with my from here to eternity whore. Paul's letter to me, I received it in France, where I was stationed. He said, come back and join us at Playwrights. We'll do old plays and new plays. But it was the answer to my prayers.
So he hooked up with the Playwrights Theater Group. He signed right on. Paul Sills had been involved in university theater. They were dedicated actors. They didn't have a dime, any of them. Together, they probably didn't have a dime. This theater troupe involved also such folks we now know as Elaine May, Mike Nichols, Barbara Harris, Zora Lampert, Tony Holland, and that whole crowd. It was an extraordinary group of very young, and curious, and intellectual actors. They were doing Brecht, who was, you know, as political as you can be. They were doing Strindberg, who was as psychological as you could be. They were doing Ibsen, also, you know, complex.
If there's a pantheon of gods, and Paul Sills has not made Zeus, then it's not worth it.
Let's just begin by saying that Paul Sills is the first person to produce Bertolt Brecht in America, to direct a production of the Caucasian Chalk Circle. I don't know, maybe it was done in Cincinnati. But making that jump, taking such an important playwright and theoretician as Brecht to the American stage and opening that door for us was gigantic. So what Paul Sills has brought, whether it's been prostituted or ruined or exaggerated or spoiled, can never be forgotten.
Nobody ever called him out. He knew what he could get away with. He knew who he could bully.
Is that something that a director has to know, you think?
I would think it would be a big help.
Viola Spolin, it was called the high priestess of improvisational theater. She developed a game structure. I think she first started working with kids in the Chicago ghetto around the time of the Depression. She got a job through the WPA and she began to teach games, mixed theater games, theatrical games of her own invention. I mean, since Paul always claimed to have learned everything from his mother, her importance is also unguesstimatable. It's an expansion of the personality, it's an expansion of the imagination, even though she didn't like that term. She didn't like imagination because that's in the head. And her contribution really was to put the actor into space. Not everyone can sustain it because it's too mysterious.
And he said, gonna do new and old plays and make 50, 60 bucks a week. Ha, ha, ha. So we came back to this old chop suey joint, which seated 160 people, north in LaSalle. We lived in the theater, we had little cubicles, and it was a wonderful, wonderful existence. David Shepard was Paul's partner, and Eugene Trubnik, an actor out of New York.
David Shepard, what would you call him? A Johnny Appleseed, and from the New York aristocracy who came and wanted to do, well, Shepard wanted to do a workers' theater, and he really wanted to start it in Gary, Indiana, but nobody in Gary, Indiana wanted to join him. They wanted to watch TV. And so he traipse back to the University of Chicago campus where there were all these very clever, smart people, many of them dropouts, including Asner himself.
Well, it opened with Caucasian Chalk Circle. Second show was La Ronde, or Round Dance. Mike Nichols was in that. And the third show, I came the opening night of Round Dance, and the third show was Wozzeck, which had me in the lead and Zora Lambert as my wife. Estelle Luttrell, Joyce Piven was in it. Tony Holland, Vern Piven.
We were all sleeping in cubicles around the stage.
Where did Ed Asner stay?
In a cubicle. And he had various females who stayed with him. He's prolific. A very sexy man. Now, this is all going on tape.
He'll like that.
Salt of the Earth was made by some of the blacklisted people about the copper miners in Arizona. No studio backing. They made the film, but they couldn't find a place to distribute it, to release it. So they asked Paul Sills, David Shepard, for permission to screen the movie at our theater, and they said yes. Bill Alton, Zora Lampert's husband at the time, heard about it and said we should ask the performers of the group whether they're willing to have this done, because they could well be tagged as commie supporters. And the group, tainted, voted, and I was one of the votes who said no. A liberal bastion. That's what we became in terms of Claudia Cassidy, Chicago Tribune. On the other hand, Sidney Harris of the Daily News and Herman Kogan of the Sun-Times adored us. Cassidy came to the first show, and her review stated, "Playwrights and I walk on different sides of the political street."
Well, he had a swagger about him. It was very convincing. And he came on and off stage, and you knew it. He's a consummate performer.
Finally, my folks came to Chicago to see me act for the first time.
What year would that have been?
Probably 54. But I wanted them to come with the right show. So I was playing Rabbi Azrael in the Dybbuk. They stayed at a nice hotel, and they came to a back entrance we had. There was a railing there, and my father, whose hand was rawhide, said, "Say, listen, you're in charge of the cleanup." And I came up those back stairs, and my hand got dirty from that railing on the back stairs. So you're in charge of the cleanup, you better do a better job. Nobody ever used that back entrance. They were the only ones. I said, "Yeah, Pop, I'll take care of it." So they saw the show, and two girls were sitting next to my mother. They were saying, "That's your son?" I said, "Yes, it's wonderful." Yes. My dad gave me some commonplace, okay. Went back to Kansas City and said that the way I played that age, he wanted to get up on that stage and help me. That's how he felt. I made the breakthrough.
Ed Asner left right before the Compass Theater began, and the Compass was a real departure from the Playwrights Theater Club, which was based on the highly significant playwrights of the late 19th and 20th, early 20th century. And the Compass was an improvisational theater. It fulfilled David Shepard's dream of a workers' theater based on scenarios about the lives of everyday people. Where the early Compass Theater was performed for an audience of these very brilliant University of Chicago physicists and dropouts, It moved uptown where the actors began getting laughs. People like Shelley Berman, who was really an astonishingly great actor and comedian, but he was addicted to the laughter. Mike Nichols, addicted to the laughter. And so a kind of a split occurred among the Compass actors, the ones who wanted to continue in the sort of serious, almost Marxist theater of that David Shepard and Paul Sills had created.
Well, I was out for creating a popular theater. I wanted to take the people in the audience and put them on the stage. That's what I wanted to do. So it's a ha-ha factory. It was not my intention.
I came to New York with pictures and resume. Didn't expect to get anywhere, but decided to get the papers. I forget what the paper was at the time, showbiz paper, and block out the city in quadrants and go to every producer and agent in that quadrant and leave a picture and resume, knowing full well that they probably went right in the wastebasket. Got nowhere with agents. So they hired me as being one of the conspirators in Venice Preserved. And it turned out that my main function was to give the signal for the plotters to assemble, which was a wolf howl, which I performed. I had learned it very well back in Kansas City. A wolf howl. Oh, not bad. The beginning was not good, but I'm out of shape. And shortly after, in the first of '56, we got an opening, Bob the Saw, understudying Tiger Brown.
It was all an accident. Well, that's what everything in life is, it's an accident.
And then about 2-3 months later, became friendly with Leon Janney, who was doing Peachum. And he said he was about to leave. So Janney, being the great gentleman he was, said, I'll tell them to give you a shot at it. And then went in as Peachum, must have been March of '56. Brecht is great. Brecht is God.
Someone like Brecht? Do we have anyone in our time? Angels in America, Tony Kushner, Hamilton. Everything is about politics. I mean, Shakespeare was about politics, wasn't he?
To wet my cheeks with artificial tears and frame my face to all occasions. Can I do this and cannot get a crown? Tut! Were it further off, I'll pluck it down.
He had to tiptoe around the Queen, but he managed to get his opinions in about what rulers are all about, what kings do. What else is there but politics? It's a part of human existence.
I started having blank out in the first scene. And no matter what how much studying, how much I may look at the script beforehand, it's going to happen. I do the first scene. For several nights, I go through this fear of blanking out, of fumbling. And I get through it, and finally I reach it. I come to the precipice so closely, and I go on, and the same fear now arises for the second scene. Go through the same hell, psychological torment. Punish myself. Third scene, fourth scene, fifth scene, all the scenes. Not the songs, but the scenes. until I've done all of them, and only once did I substitute a word for another word. That's the only time it happened. But I went through the torment, all those lines, and then finally I subside into the numbness of the psychology I existed in at that time. Shortly after that, Harlan Quist, one of the producers of Ivanov, comes and says they'd like me to take over the role of Borkin. I go see the show, I love it. I'm leaving a 300-seat theater for a 150-seat theater. It was just to be free. I was going to classes too. I studied with Stella when I first came to town. I spent about 3 months there, didn't care for it, and left. I tried Strasberg for about a year, while at the same time studying with my other teacher, Mira Rostova, who was my best teacher. Some guy was doing a scene at the studio, and Cloris was in the front row. And part of his sense memory was he was going to eat a banana, and he said, "My God, I can smell it." And there was Cloris in the front row eating a peeled banana. By 59, I get married in 59. I moved to an apartment on 16th and 3rd. Much nicer place. Fewer roaches. As a wedding present, I was offered roles at Stratford, Connecticut. I think it was the agents, I guess, able to convince Hausman and Landau to try me out. They gave me inconsequential roles. Joe Papp came along, wanted me to play the Duke of York in Henry V. I said, yeah.
Did you like working with Pam?
Very much,
Yeah.
very much.
And he said that in New York, he didn't dare to take the same chances he could in Chicago, in that little Chicago theater, and how much that meant to him, Second City, of which Asner is an honorary member. He's on the roll, the roster of actors who helped to create this improvisational, unrule-bound theater.
Face of a Hero had been a successful Playoffs 90 show. They wanted me to do this role of Perry Cates. Jack Lemmon was starring, James Donald, Betsy Blair, Sandy Dennis, Ellen Holly. Sandy McKendrick was the director. The day before rehearsals, he tells me, "Loved your reading. Of course, it can't be that funny." Well, okay. The man who directed Alec Guinness and all those great comedies, he knows what he's talking about. I won't be that funny. He'll show me. Start rehearsals from the get-go. I practically have to have my back to the audience. And the character's there for two reasons: to commit perjury and to get laughs. Well, it's easy to commit perjury, but I certainly couldn't get laughs with my back to the audience. Yeah, I had a lot of that in those days. Well, I found this particularly true at Threepenny Opera, where I'd come out there as Peachum and say, "Let me remind you of to all the beggars." And John Aston and Stefan Girash, who played other roles in the show, would be there, and with my every utterance, they'd, they would create these guttural.
Trying to upstage you.
Yeah. That certainly was a moment where I felt I got to live with it.
It's unconscious.
John had been with the show from the beginning. Now, Fred Downs, who had preceded me somewhat earlier as Peachum, would come out there, and when John would, when he'd make these utterances, Fred would throw him a fish. and that's how he avoided being upstaged. Naked City. I played a detective who gets winged in the course of action. I think that was also Robert Duvall's first job in New York, too. The Route 66, I play an Israeli undercover operative along with Bruce Dern. So I do those things which establishes me with the Burt Leonard organization. In March 61, they need to do multiple shooting, Naked City that is. They decide to send Paul Burke and another detective to California to pick up two brothers. So I get to investigate LA, run into a lot of agents, see a lot of people, call my wife and say, I'm going to be seeing all these people. She saw the handwriting on the wall. We prepare to leave. My brother, my mother buy us an Impala. We go in style. We rent a 14-foot U-Haul. So we start out in May for Los Angeles. And since the car is so weighted down by the 14-foot U-Haul, we can't go over 40 without a street bouncing up against our bumper. Finally, we got to Kansas City. My big brother, who's on a construction supply firm, his mechanics put on air shocks. So the rest of the trip, we were able to go 60, 65 miles an hour. Because I was tired, she took over for a while. And she's in the hills and curves of Zion. And she said, yeah, these brakes sure don't seem very good. I have to pump them, huh? I said, yeah, well, just keep pumping them. They'll work. I said, okay, I'll take over. My foot slams on the floor. There were no brakes. Well, we stop in Las Vegas, play the machines, then head for Los Angeles. Labor Day weekend by now. And I'm driving, and 4 lanes of headlights are coming at me. Endless, non-stop. I thought, Jesus Christ. Wow. They must have dropped the bomb. There's a total exodus coming out of LA. What's happened? Heard no news. Get into LA. It's a normal weekend in LA. Holiday weekend. Stay with a friend for a week. Locate a place, an apartment in the hills, over a garage. It's an estate. Belonged to an associate producer. Second or third night we're there. Hear a rustling outside. Nancy and I, my wife, are sure that that's some kind of critter. So we turn off the lights and we look. The big avocado tree growing right next to our window. We look out. A couple of raccoons are lying on their backs, eating avocados. And I thought, God damn. And I said, I'm home. I'm home at last. Found when I came as a liberal in '61 to California, looking for all those liberal actors to identify with. And in the course of time, I worked with conservative actors here, there. They were a lot more polite and nicer to me, without knowing my credentials, than the liberal actors who were so busy pursuing their liberalness and flaunting their credentials that they didn't have time for the little guy. Lee. She's the one who said I was married to a communist and I was married to a fascist. And neither one carried out the garbage.
And here comes Ed Asner. in a variety of forgettable television parts in the early 1960s, but moving towards moments when something could happen in television that hadn't happened before. The Dick Van Dyke Show. The first 13 episodes were considered very interesting for New York. They were very in-joke, Jewish, New Yorky. And then the head of the production company turned in desperation to Frank Tarloff. And with Frank Tarloff, the Dick Van Dyke Show took shape, and they were able to introduce some social themes. First of all, a woman who was a career woman on her own, who didn't want to become the boss's secretary and marry him, and a sort of general opening up of many of television's taboos, including the use of non-white people, African Americans mostly, weren't used in step-and-fetch-it fashion to make fun of them, but were seen as perfectly ordinary New Yorkers. This, astonishingly, on the Dick Van Dyke Show was a breakthrough. Well, Dick Van Dyke leads to Mary Tyler Moore, which leads to Lou Grant.
Well, I auditioned for the Mary Tyler Moore show, and I thought it was a wonderful character. And I read for it with Brooks and Burns. When I finished, Jim Brooks said, well, that was a very intelligent reading. And I was not too dumb to realize, but it wasn't funny. And he said, well, when we have you back to read with Mary, a bright sign. But he wants you to read a wiggy, wild, falling out, crazy. And I thought, oh. I started to walk out, and I said, turn around, and I said, look, I'm not sure what you mean. Why don't you have me try it that way now, and if I can't do it, don't have me back. I read it like a Meshuggah, and they laughed their asses off. They said, when you come back, read it just like that with Mary. So the whole time, a week or 2 weeks, because how did I do it? What was it I did? I came back to read with Mary, and they laughed. They laughed big, and I left the room, and years later I understand that Mary then turned to them and said, are you sure? And they said, that's your Lou Grant.
Was there ever such a persona anywhere? It was just a delightful, grumpy, wise guy, boss. It was Asner's way of getting back at the boss and yet making him totally lovable. You know, I mean, he was for the workers, and look at the boss he created. Yay.
To have this character, to have these scripts, this is the best stuff I've ever had. They put it on Saturday. It became the nucleus of the whole Saturday night vehicle for CBS, mostly comedies, but they were a smash.
You only need to think about the effect of MASH, and then Saturday Night Live, and then The Simpsons, and Rosie, and so forth. Things that cannot be said politically, even by actors, except occasionally in art films, could be said by people in sitcoms.
When Lou came along, everybody was getting their show. I got my offer from CBS. It was an hour show with no audience, one camera. It was a new milieu for all of us. The scripts were excellent. I was in therapy shortly after, at that time. When the show finally came on, my therapist, who never said anything, this is the only valuable thing he gave me, he said, why do you grimace so much? I grimace? And I realized, without 300 people in the audience, and even though Lou Grant was a dramatic show, it had laughs in it. So that whenever there was a laugh, I felt I had to clue the people in at home that it's okay to laugh. And I would grimace. And I thought, oh, God, strike me dead. So I stopped grimacing. We settled down to do the show properly as a one-camera, no-audience show for an hour. And we lasted 5 years.
One of those rare cerebral comedians who managed to be wonderfully funny and hide his cerebral qualities and the fact that he was a serious intellectual, and make himself gruff or make himself resistant to difficult ideas, or allow himself to have sudden realizations of how terrible things were in relation to social themes at home and U.S. activities abroad. Really a tour de force.
He's had so many awards I can't really count them. He was one of those actors who's everybody knows his face, everybody knows he's good. The television people know him best probably worldwide because Lou Grant was sold all over the place, all over the world.
He became president of the Guild, the SAG, and Screen Actors Guild. How he got that job is amazing, because really the actors and the workers of Hollywood are not all that liberal as you might think. There are a lot of union guys who can be quite negative about people who are what we call progressive.
A former an informant of the FBI, Ronald Reagan, became president of the SAG in the later 1940s, and in many ways not only gave actors the worst contract that they had ever received, refused to organize in television, and also ended committees for the encouragement of non-white actors to step forward. One of his first acts was to abolish that committee. It took more than a decade to come back against the power of Ronald Reagan and his allies. So that Ed is, in a way, riding an upward trend toward social significance within the SAG, but there was no one as controversial, as bold.
During the latter part of the Reagan years, I had joined two groups, one called the Archbishop Romero Relief Fund, which was designed to rescue the Salvadorans who came to the States, a harmless group run by Sister Pat Cromer, and a lovely, wonderful woman, caring woman and a fighter. And then I was asked to become a board member of Medical Aid for El Salvador, which was designed to create medical aid for those peasants who were not receiving government sustenance, a humanist effort to stop the death squads, to speak out against our government, who was keeping the generals and officers supplied with their death dealing.
Mr. Reagan, who was in office, very popular president, had no patience for communism of any kind, and he put everything in polar terms, like dualistic terms. The communists were in Nicaragua, and they were going to invade across the border of the Rio Grande. The knee-jerk reactionary fear of communists invading the United States. That's an old theme.
I think it was his example that gave courage to the whole idea of looking into what Reagan was doing in Central America. So he had a profound effect.
I can't say everybody fell for it this time. A lot of people went down there and said, this is nonsense. These are people trying to build a society. They're farmers, they're trade workers. These are people who are trying to, this is one of the poorest societies in the Americas. This was run as a brutal dictatorship for 60, 70 years, supported by the U.S. And when the time they got rid of that in 1979, that was a tremendous, tremendous moment for them, the same as for Eastern Europe throwing off communism. But no one understood that in the United States, or a lot of people did, but Reagan didn't, certainly, and his policy was so ignorant and destructive. They went down, they supported the Contras, who were a bunch of, frankly, gangsters and thugs.
Give them good weapons that won't misfire, and then let me lead them into the mire, into jungles reeking of bullets and blood. A man needs a rifle as he dies in the mud.
You make a mistake in sending arms to Tehran, sir?
No, And I'm not taking any more questions. In just a second, I'm going to ask Attorney General Meese to brief you on what we presently know of what he has found out.
Is anyone else going to be let go, sir? Is anyone else going to be let go?
No one was let go. They chose to go.
What about Secretary Schultz?
The group had received enough money, $25,000, and we went as a delegation to Washington because I was the new president of the Screen Actors Guild and the star of an ongoing TV show. I make the opening speech for medical aid. And the first question was an innocuous one. The second question was, you say you are in favor of free elections in El Salvador. I said, yeah. I said, well, what will you do if they produce a communist government? And I said, oh, the magic word. The magic word, my God. And I mumbled some pablum answer to the man and went on to the next question and answered it as best I could, the whole time haunted by how I had betrayed by not answering properly. And I said I wasn't satisfied with my first answer, but I would say to you that if it's the government the people of El Salvador choose, then let them have it. And with that, I felt I was signing my death warrant, that I would never work as an actor again.
Well, Hollywood has always been pro-establishment in the sense that even back in the 30s and the 20s, all the tycoons, they basically followed the flow, you know. And when it came to communism, they went nuts. And this whole Red Scare was one of the worst, most dishonorable chapters in American history. But it happens again and again, and it may happen one more time. The vigilantism of America.
But every bit of shit that dumped on my head from that point on was, I feel, based on that. And got back home and found that the bustle of lies about me, that I was pledging union money. Heston then began the great campaign against me, because at the same time we were bringing extras back into the Guild. On my first meeting as president at the Guild, he assembled a large group of stuntmen, day players, to protest my action. Heston thought he controlled the union off stage as well as on. Interestingly enough, never did anything to convince us in the boardroom itself or in the offices of the Guild, but decided to stage this big rally outside the meeting of the board the first time I presided. So he had TV cameras there. They felt it was necessary for me to leave the meeting and address the crowd that was outside the union. I came out and there was Heston. Heston put out his hand to shake mine, and because of the nature of what he was doing to disrupt our first meeting, I said, I'd rather not, if you don't mind. So then we answered pap questions about what we were doing, and the fear generated by Heston with the stuntmen and with the day players was that bringing in the extras would steal jobs. Not true, of course, because it didn't happen. And that wasn't my decision. It was the decision of the executives of the Screen Actors Guild. Heston cited some more pablum and then put out his hand again to shake mine. And I went like this, and I said, oh, to hell with it, and I shook his hand. Going back in, there was a guy who had been the third candidate for the presidency. Turned out later he was working as an agent to convey news of the boardroom meetings to Heston. And as I walked back into the meeting with this Morgan fellow, I'm still thinking of the handshake. And I turned to him, not caring who was listening. I said, And then back in Kansas, we used to call somebody a cocksucker when he had brought off a coup. And so I said, the cocksucker got me to shake his hand. Morgan then went back and immediately reported it to the right-wing gang of the Guild. It finally got to Heston. He wrote letters to every board member and every officer of the Guild saying, how could you have a president of such nature that in the presence of 7 TV cameras and umpteen still cameras, interviewers use a word like cocksucker, call me a cocksucker. But from that point on, it became overt warfare between Heston and me and the right-wingers of the Union. Now, nobody ever complained when Heston toured Vietnam as president of the Guild or attacked his actions in support of the war. But he was attacking me, and as he said in an interview for ABC, he said, I don't care if he's giving to the People's Republic of China. I don't care what he does. In other words, it was his way of saying, I don't care whether he's a communist or not. He shouldn't be giving this money.
When actors made liberal statements about repression or about civil rights, certainly until the 1970s, they were accused of betraying their actor status. And if it cost them their careers, then it was their own fault it cost them their careers. No such invectives were directed at actors who supported wars and other policies of the U.S. abroad, only at those who resisted such things.
So I had to properly clarify for the people at large that no union money was involved, and that when I spoke, it was not as president of the Guild when I spoke for medical aid or for the freedom of the people of El Salvador. The water was so muddied that Kimberly Clark withdrew their sponsorship of Lou Grant. They had 2 factories in El Salvador and had already been identified with the John Birch Society. Vidal Sassoon withdrew their sponsorship of the show, as did Cadbury's Chocolates. Backed off from supporting this show that this supposed commie was the star of. I heard in afterwards that Paley came in and saw that the show was still up there for Monday night, that his rant was, what's that doing there? Get it off there! Get it off there! And so the show was canceled.
There were actors who didn't believe in what he was doing, but a vast majority of them did, and that's why he was elected for a second time. And the tragedy was when Lou Grant was hooked off the networks for no adequate reason.
My recollection is that Lou Grant was the highest rated program that was ever canceled in the history of television. Certainly the highest rated program that was ever canceled for clear political reasons.
He was fired, I believe, from Lou Grant series, or let go, they suspended, and this is one of the, I gather it was one of the most popular shows on TV. So it's crazy, but they actually kicked him off the air, like they did later with Phil Donahue during the Iraq War.
Thousands assembled outside CBS to protest for a couple of weeks. A lovely vice president from CBS came out to show to me that it wasn't for politics, it's because MASH would no longer be on Monday nights, and they were worried that Lou Grant could not carry Monday night. The politics had nothing to do with it. I said, okay. But he was nice enough to come out and visit. You only need a couple of blacklists a century to intimidate people enough not to put their tongue forward. Even your liberals participate in it. They don't blacklist you because you're a commie or think you're a commie, but because their inner soul says, no, he's too fat, he's too thin, he's too bald, he's too old, he's too young. They'll find a very good, efficient reason not to hire you for the job.
It's scary, but Hollywood operates a bit like a gray list is always in evidence. It's nothing stated, but it's just there. So if you speak up, say things all the time, people get tired of you, they think you're more interested in politics and film and so forth and so on. You pay the price.
Howard Rodman wrote a script for a new series to go on CBS's medical series. And the producer of that show, Howard, suggested I would be good for such and such a role. And the producer said, no, I think he'd be a political liability. Euphemism for blacklist. About a year later, I got a job narrating in Boston. The first day, the producer took me out to lunch. And he said, you know why you're here? I said, no. Why? You don't want my voice? He said, about 6 months ago, you gave an interview on radio. I said, yeah. And you said that liberals take place in the blacklisting. You decide you're either too fat, too thin, too bald, too old, too young. And I said, yeah. He said, that's why you're here. I said, what do you mean? Oh, about a year ago, I had another documentary, and I sent in a list of names to the corporation as to who I would like for narration. And your name was at the top. And they sent the list back with a red line through your name. And I said, oh. And after I heard your radio show, I realized that's what I had done. And that's why you're here now. And if those two instances of blacklisting were what I knew, then God knows what was underneath the sea of the iceberg. I got busier. I had series which lasted longer.
I do think his fortune changed. He got roles after that, nothing big, but he got major roles in animation movies like Up, and I think his voice was big, important in the movie, and I think his work came from mostly voiceovers, I guess commercials and animation movies. And then he got on the stage again after JFK. He got on the stage and he worked with some very good actors on some plays, and eventually he got picked up on Good Wife, which is a new TV series.
He believed in proper democracy. I mean, to be a democratic socialist in America is not much fun. I mean, you get assailed from all quarters. And I think he must have had an awful lot of attacks on him, which must have been difficult for his family, but he just never gave up.
Jane Fonda, I remember respecting her enormously, and as a Vietnam veteran, I don't understand why they took it out on her, because if you really understand the situation, she did what she thought was right. She was older than me, another generation, but I always thought, wow, this is an amazing woman, and Vanessa Redgrave too.
My agent, who liked to pride himself on signing blacklisted actors, this is before I became blacklisted, of course, said to me that he was shocked that I didn't disappear into that good night. And he felt that it was the fact that I didn't shut up, that every time a charge was leveled against me, or an accusation, that I didn't take it quietly. I answered in print to the accusation and probably damned the accuser.
You think there's a lesson in that?
Don't give up the ship. And certainly, running and hiding doesn't save your ass. I would say I had as many kudos paid to me by conservatives for standing up and speaking my mind as I had liberals. I appeared on the Gary Sinise show. They prize standing on your feet. John Voight, you can't wait to put his arms around me.
Probably 72. After The Interns was canceled, I got lucky and got another show. It was with Tony Quinn. Great luck for me to be able to work with him. I got a call from some people I had come to know. Would I come to an event downtown where they were raising money for Dan Ellsberg for his defense? They said, do you think you could ask Mr. Quinn if he'd be willing to come? And I said, absolutely, sure. So I talked to him and he said, oh, gee, Mike, I can't. I'm sorry, I'm tied up. So I went down, did it. It was really a powerful event. And I got back to the set and Tony said, how'd that go? And I said, it went really well. I wish you'd been able to come. And he said, I apologize. I wasn't truthful with you. I could have come. But I was here in the 50s. And I saw what happened to people's careers. And frankly, it scared me. Now, when somebody like Anthony Quinn tells you he was scared, it gives you an idea, it seems to me, of the power that these bastards had and the damage they did.
There is the noble pursuit, and then there's the economic pursuit. You don't want to make waves, you keep your mouth shut. We're all in it for the bucks, but we're trying to live lives that we respect in addition to striving for the bucks. When HUAC was busy on its witch hunt, looking for those writers who might have created too strong a Soviet support in their writing, they couldn't find diddly squat. The vast majority of films are within a very solid middle that everybody can accept. Mr. and Mrs. Middle America is what they're representing. I guess Fort Apache, the Bronx was the last film I did before I became controversial, before the series was canceled. It was a hell of a good movie. Could have been made a lot better if they had adjusted some changes. But it was a great movie as it depicted New York at the time. JFK came along. I liked the work I did there. I thought the movie he made was brilliant. I was also impressed by the fact that in the New York Times, which was pre-Iraq, of course, 4 and 5 op-ed pieces by well-known people attacking JFK before it even opened. I'd go up to Oliver Stone and I'd say, how about if I said the line this way instead of that way? And sometimes he'd say, yeah, okay. But if there was a 5-minute pause between the time I did that and the time I said it, immediately he came back at the end of 5 minutes. He said, no, leave it the way it was. I couldn't let him have time to think it over.
Ed Asner had the right approach to the scene. He was so gruff. He was the embodiment to me of Guy Bannister, who a lot of people knew, by the way, and historically knew him. So a lot of people give me a lot of compliments on Ed's performance of the role.
I had been with Jack Lemmon on stage and came to like him a great deal. And he had supported my presidency at SAG. It came to the point in the scene where I pistol whip him. And I've done enough stunts that I felt very secure about coming close, but not too close. So I do the scene, I whack him. He goes down, comes up, and he's got graze marks of blood across his face. I felt terrible about it. So we did it again, and he goes down. I grazed him twice, but it looked good for the film.
Interesting. I could see that he was nervous, and he probably overdid it in the scene, but it could happen to anybody. But it was a very real moment. It stays with me in the sense that Ed became Guy Bannister.
So we did JFK. It got the award and applause that Oliver Deserved. I love the book of Daniel. I love doing the movie as the lawyer for the kids. I am a masochist in a certain sense.
I remember saying something to Barry Sullivan in a film we were doing. He looked at me and said, you ought to try directing. And he didn't mean it in a nice way. I did it to Peter O'Toole, for Christ's sake. I just smelled right and wrong. And I felt something could be buttered up better, I would say it. If they were going overkill, I would say that. I said it to Jimmy Caan at one point when we were doing Elf. I don't know if you heard me or not. As I said it to Peter O'Toole about this line is, you were better saying it that way than that way. It's an urge to help, not to destroy. And if the listener, hearer, can accept it as such, then I'm safe. But I will offend at times, and I'll run that risk. To go all the way through that picture called Chinatown, and then at the end of that picture, to have Nicholson get pissed off at the cop and act like he's going to take a punch at him, and to have his good friend say, Jake, you don't. It's Chinatown. I'm a simple man. I need some simple answers. They didn't give them to me. Oh, LA Confidential. I thought it was wonderful. I thought performances were wonderful. I thought it smacked of truth. I love Blade Runner. Well, primarily for Rutger Hauer on a rooftop, citing one of the most beautiful speeches I've ever heard on film. The funny thing about it, after I left office as president of SAG, the power seekers at SAG decided to look him up and see if he'd be interested. So they were having lunch at a restaurant, and he said, how much does the job pay? Yeah, it's Chinatown.
What do you want from a director?
Either agreement or revelation. Another way to do what I'm doing that I hadn't thought of. And that happens sometimes. The most precious director I have come across. He has a program that he's going to incorporate now. And I'm not doing it his way. He can look at me, study me, if there's time. And he says, yeah, it's not what I planned, but I can use it. I can incorporate it and accept it. And that, to me, is a great director.
Usually every role he's had, it's not only I see my father in it, but they're good people, you know? They really are. Humanitarians, and they always wind up doing what's right. I think Rich Man, Poor Man, his role there was quite a departure for him.
I suppose a lot of Americans see him as funnier than more of a comedian actor than a dramatic actor. But I think he was very good as a dramatic actor. And if he'd been in film more thoroughly, rather than television, I think he'd be a very big star worldwide. Well, he is in a way. Everybody knows Ed.
Sometimes I get the giggles on stage. It's a bad habit, but Ed would definitely bring that out of me. I was always having to bite my lip. An unexpected line delivery, or because he really keeps with that spirit of improvisation, which is where he came from. It was a real dexterity to his performances.
I don't have any preference. I love doing voiceover. And if I can get into it, then I adore it. So it doesn't matter to me as long as I'm performing and feel secure or slightly edgy.
I saw your Huey Long, and I thought you brought all kinds of nuances and insights into that part that I'd never thought about before in terms of who that guy was.
I love doing the roles. The scene in the hospital where she comes to see me, and becomes quite apparent that she's my mistress. And I would say that it's one of the scenes showing the goodness of the man in his treatment of her. It ennobles him. And Russell Long wanted that scene cut, and NBC wouldn't do it. So he then went to RCA, and of course he was chairman of the Finance Committee for the Senate. All those contracts for RCA lay in his hand. He said he wants that scene cut, and they cut it.
And there was one show he had a raging fever, but he would not miss a show. And you know, he had some rather lengthy speeches, but I guess he does one-person shows still.
I loved FDR. I was a sophomore in high school when he died. I believed fully in him. I know he was a chameleon and tricky. A godlike man in terms of stature. The speech I do, which I think is a telling one, is that I'll be watching out for them. The Gerald L. K. Smiths, the Father Coughlin's, the Joseph Martins, the bankers and the businessmen, Colonel Lindbergh. Of them all, I think the bankers and the businessmen irritate me the most. They seem to have forgotten how sick they were 4 years ago. But I remember, I still have their fever charts. And oh, how the knees on those rugged individualists were trembling, and their hearts were fluttering. They came to Washington in trainloads. It wasn't a dangerous bureaucracy back then. No, it was an emergency hospital. And oh, how those extremely distinguished patients craved a hypodermic to stop the pain, to cure the disease. And I gave it to them. Most of them doing quite well now. Some of them doing so well they want to throw their crutches in the doctor's face. But we'll just have to tell them, I don't use crutches anymore. Well, first of all, they only know me as a fuddy-duddy old man, a cranky old man, either as Santa Claus or as Carl Fredrickson. Commie doesn't mean anything anymore. Terrorist is a much more amorphous title to deal with now that you've chosen that as your enemy. Viggo Mortensen is a phenomenal individual, artistically, socially. Edward Norton, from what I hear, is a wonderful, standout individual, socially as well as artistically. And there have to be many more, but they don't crowd the headlines. I think we can take hope from such talent and such people as that, who do it for the rest of us.
You need Americans like this, and so many people in Hollywood wimp out. You need Americans who speak up for what they believe and fight for it. We've done a movie on Ed Snowden, and there's a young man, he's 29 years old, and he threw it all away, in a sense, for his conscience. He threw away his life that he knew that was safe and protected. And now he's in exile. So people like that, kudos to them. I think if I were a person like Ed, I'd be very happy with my conscience and where I was.
What I'm really drawn to with Ed is his heart, you know, and the amount of love that he has for what he does and for people.
And into that dropped Ed Asner. Now, I don't know how or when, but at any rate, he was very welcome. He's still my friend, and I'm proud to have him.
I wish he'd come to England a bit more often and shouted a bit here, because I think he would have been understood better.
There's a sort of generosity about being in that kind of ideological theater, groundbreaking theater, that maybe is so inspiring. The glow lasts forever and gives off a certain kind of light that others can bask in. And to me, that's the courage of Ed Asner.
Daniel Ellsberg is a hero. I think Edward Snowden's a hero. I think Ed Asner is a hero. And I think they are because they put at risk something meaningful and valuable to them in order to do something beneficial for the people they believe in and the country they believe in. But there are many others. You know, there's the Dolores Huertas and the Cesar Chavez and the Martin Luther King. And I put Ed right up there in that pantheon. I think they are heroic people who are willing to risk their own lives and careers.
You're a guy like that. You tell people what you think.
No, I don't.
You don't?
I think,
on occasion.
I haven't told you you're an asshole.
No, not lately.
Well, you got your moment in the sun. Now beat it.
We made love on the subway floor.